My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 74 years old now, living here in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I worked most of my life as a high school literature teacher, shaping young minds and watching generations of students walk through those doors. Today, I live on my pension, in a quiet routine that took years to rebuild. Quiet. That's almost funny to say, because after what happened, it took an eternity for any sense of peace to return to my heart. When you think you know someone better than you know yourself, when you've shared 4 decades of your life with them, and then discover you didn't know them at all, that's what happened to me. I never thought I'd share this story with anyone, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe it'll serve as a warning. You spend your entire life building trust, believing in people with your whole heart, and sometimes one small decision changes absolutely everything. In my case, it was a trip I decided to cancel at the last minute. If I had followed through with that trip as planned, I might still be living in blissful ignorance today. But fate, or God, or whatever force guides us, wanted me to discover the truth. It was March of 2020. I was 69 years old at the time. Thomas and I had been married for 40 years, a lifetime together. We'd raised 2 daughters, built our home from the ground up, and created what I thought was an unshakable foundation. That month, I needed to travel to Minneapolis to visit my sister Linda, who'd been diagnosed with pneumonia. Thomas wasn't coming with me because he said he had a major project deadline at the architecture firm where he still consulted part-time. It all sounded perfectly reasonable. Nothing strange about it at all. He even mentioned he'd use my absence to finally organize his office and donate some old books. I'd traveled alone before. He'd stayed home. I never suspected anything. The trip was scheduled for a Wednesday. I was planning to be gone for 1 week. On Tuesday night, I packed my suitcase and set aside my medications. Thomas even prepared his famous lasagna for me to take to Linda. She always loved his cooking. In the early morning hours, I got a call from my niece saying that Linda had been moved to ICU and that it was better if I postponed my visit for a few days due to hospital restrictions. I was worried, naturally, but I understood there was no point in making that drive if I couldn't even see my sister. That's when I had what seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. Instead of telling Thomas the trip was canceled, I thought I'd surprise him. Our marriage had felt distant lately, that routine that settles in after so many years together. I thought, I'll pretend to leave for the trip anyway, and I'll come back at the end of the day with flowers and his favorite wine. I'll prepare a romantic dinner. I thought it would rekindle something between us. What a foolish idea for a 69-year-old woman, right? But at the time, it seemed perfect, even sweet. What I didn't know was that this one decision would shatter my entire world. Sometimes you live your whole life beside someone and believe you know every corner of their heart. But there are things only God truly knows. I was born right here in Cedar Falls in 1951, when everything was different than it is today. My father, Dr. James Chen, was a family physician who served this community for 40 years. My mother, Ruth, was a librarian at the public library. I had one younger sister, Linda, and we grew up in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street. Our childhood was filled with books, classical music on Sunday mornings, and my mother's incredible apple strudel. I discovered my love for literature early. I remember being about 9 years old, lying under the oak tree in our backyard, reading Little Women for the first time and thinking, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to help people discover the magic of stories. I studied hard through school, earned a scholarship to the University of Iowa, and graduated with a degree in English literature in 1973. That same year, I got my first teaching position here in Cedar Falls at Roosevelt High School. I was 22 years old, terrified, and absolutely thrilled. It was in 1974 that I met Thomas Reed. He was 25, working as a junior architect at Morrison & Associates downtown. We met at a community fundraiser for the library. My mother had dragged me there, saying I needed to socialize more instead of always having my nose in a book. Thomas was charming, ambitious, with these intense blue eyes and a way of describing buildings like they were living poetry. He approached me by the refreshment table. "You look like someone who appreciates good structure," he said, which was probably the strangest pickup line I'd ever heard. When I laughed, he grinned and explained he'd been watching me examine the library's architecture. We talked for 3 hours that night about everything: books, buildings, dreams, fears. Our courtship lasted 2 years. Thomas was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was meticulous, detail-oriented, sometimes a bit controlling, but I thought it meant he cared deeply about things. We got engaged in the spring of 1976. I was 25. He was 27. We married in January of 1977 in a beautiful ceremony at First Presbyterian Church. My mother cried through the entire service. We honeymooned in Chicago, spending our days in museums and our nights planning our future. We wanted to build something lasting: a home, a family, a legacy. Our first daughter, Rachel, was born in 1979 when I was 28. She was perfect: 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and her father's blue eyes. Thomas was an attentive father in those early years, always present for bath time and bedtime stories. Our second daughter, Sophie, arrived in 1982. She was my wild child from day one, so different from her careful, studious older sister. The 1980s were good years for us. Thomas's career was flourishing. He became a partner at his firm in 1985. I was teaching full-time, loving every moment with my students. We built our dream house in 1987 on a beautiful lot on the outskirts of town. Thomas designed it himself, a modern ranch-style home with huge windows overlooking the woods behind us. We had a life: Sunday barbecues with the neighbors, summer vacations at Lake Superior, Thanksgiving dinners where our dining room table overflowed with family and laughter. I thought we were happy. I thought I knew my husband completely. But looking back now, I can see the small signs I missed. Or maybe they weren't there yet. Maybe change happens so gradually that you don't notice until it's too late. The 1990s brought more success. Rachel excelled in school and went off to Stanford in 1997 to study medicine. Sophie, our artist, chose the Rhode Island School of Design in 2000. The house felt too quiet without them, but Thomas and I adjusted. We had more time for each other, or so I thought. Thomas threw himself into his work even more. He was designing increasingly ambitious projects, traveling more for consultations. I was promoted to department head at the high school in 2003. We were busy, successful, comfortable. In 2008, I became a grandmother for the first time when Rachel had her daughter Emma. The following year, Sophie married her college sweetheart David, and they gave us our grandson Oliver in 2011. Being a grandmother brought me a joy I hadn't expected. It filled some emptiness I hadn't even realized was there. I retired from teaching in 2015 at age 64, after 42 years in the classroom. Thomas was already semi-retired, consulting from home on select projects. We were supposed to enter this new chapter together, travel, spend time with the grandchildren, enjoy the life we'd built. But something began to shift in 2018 when I was 67. Small things at first, nothing that immediately raised alarms, but strange enough to catch my attention. Thomas, who had always been a homebody, started going out more. He joined a photography club that met on Tuesday evenings. He started a woodworking hobby that required trips to a specialty store in Des Moines every Thursday. He volunteered to help with a community building project on Saturday mornings. At first, I thought it was wonderful. "You deserve hobbies, Tom," I told him. "After all those years working so hard, you should enjoy yourself." And he'd smile, kiss me on the forehead, and say, "Just trying to stay active, Maggie. Can't just sit around waiting to get old." But little inconsistencies started appearing. Once, he said he was at his photography club meeting, and when I mentioned it the next day to our neighbor Jim, who was also supposedly in the club, Jim looked confused. "We didn't have a meeting yesterday, Margaret. It was canceled because the community center had a pipe burst." When I asked Thomas about it, he seemed flustered for a moment, then said, "Oh, right. I got the days mixed up. I went to look at some camera equipment instead." Another time, I noticed a receipt in his jacket pocket for an expensive dinner at a restaurant in Des Moines on a night when he'd told me he was at his woodworking class. When I mentioned it, he explained it away quickly. He'd taken a potential client to dinner to discuss a project. His appearance changed too. He started caring more about his clothes, buying new shirts, getting his hair cut more frequently. He lost weight, joined a gym. "Just trying to stay healthy," he explained, and that seemed reasonable for a man in his late 60s. But the biggest change was his phone. Thomas had never been attached to his phone before, but suddenly it was always within reach. He took it to the bathroom when he showered. He slept with it on his nightstand, face down. If it buzzed while we were together, he'd glance at it with this small, secret smile before putting it away without explanation. One night in late 2018, I woke up around 2 a.m. and Thomas wasn't in bed. I found him in his office, lit only by the glow of his phone screen, smiling at whatever he was reading. When I asked if everything was okay, he jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "Just an old client," he said quickly. "Different time zone. Go back to bed, Maggie." By early 2019, when I was 68, our relationship had cooled noticeably. We still lived in the same house, ate dinner together most nights, maintained the appearance of a normal marriage. But the warmth was gone. The intimacy had disappeared. We were like polite roommates sharing space. His trips became more frequent. The woodworking store in Des Moines required visits twice a week now. The photography club added weekend workshops. There was always somewhere he needed to be, always a perfectly reasonable explanation. I started paying closer attention. I noticed his car's mileage didn't match the distances he claimed to drive. When he said he'd been to Des Moines and back, the odometer showed he'd driven twice as far. Where else was he going? One day in April 2019, I was putting away his laundry and found a small jewelry box tucked in the back of his sock drawer. My heart racing, I opened it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, beautiful and clearly expensive. It wasn't my style. Thomas knew I preferred gold. My birthday had passed months ago. Our anniversary wasn't until January. Who was this bracelet for? I put it back exactly as I'd found it and said nothing. I watched and waited. The bracelet disappeared from the drawer 2 weeks later. He'd given it to someone. In June, Thomas announced he was taking a solo trip to Minnesota for a photography workshop. "Just guys," he said. 4 days up at a cabin near the Boundary Waters. No wives allowed. You know how these things are. Something about it didn't ring true, but what could I say? I had no proof of anything, just suspicions and a growing dread in the pit of my stomach. He left on a Thursday morning, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection he'd shown for months, present but distant. I watched him drive away and felt absolutely certain something was wrong. I tried calling his cell phone that evening. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again the next morning. Same thing. "No signal up here," he texted back hours later. "We'll call when I can." But that Sunday, while grocery shopping, I ran into Bill Morrison, Thomas's old boss from the architecture firm. "Margaret," he greeted me warmly, "how are you? And how's Tom? I heard he was up at the cabin with you two for a few days. You must be glad to have that time together." My smile froze. "The cabin?" "Yeah, your place up on Lake Superior. Tom mentioned you two were heading up there for a long weekend." Getting away from it all, he said, "We didn't have a cabin on Lake Superior. We'd never owned one." I made an excuse and left quickly, my groceries half forgotten. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the car. When Thomas came home Monday evening, tanned and relaxed, I asked casually about his trip. He launched into a detailed story about the workshop, the guys he'd been with, the photographs he'd taken. Every word was a lie, and he delivered it with such ease that I felt sick. Over the next few months, I started documenting everything. I kept a small notebook hidden in my nightstand where I wrote down every discrepancy, every time his story didn't match the facts, every suspicious behavior. The final straw came in February 2020. I was 69, and we'd just celebrated our 43rd wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. Thomas had given me flowers and a generic card. I'd given him a book on architectural photography that he'd mentioned wanting. We'd gone through the motions like actors in a play we'd performed too many times. A week later, his phone rang while he was in the shower. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, and I saw the name flash on the screen. Victoria. Don't answer. Just that. A woman's name with a very specific instruction. My heart pounded. I let it ring. When it stopped, I grabbed his phone and tried to open it, but it was password protected. Something new. He'd never had a password before. When he came out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table, his phone in front of me. "You have a call," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "From Victoria." The color drained from his face, just for a second, but I saw it. Then he recovered, picked up the phone casually. "Oh, that's Victoria Harrison. She's interested in commissioning me to design an addition to her house. I told her only to call during business hours, but..." He shrugged as if it was nothing. But I'd seen his face. I'd seen the flash of panic. That night, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. I couldn't live in this limbo of suspicion and half-truths anymore. It was early March when the opportunity came. Linda, my sister, really did get sick with pneumonia. I really did plan a trip to Minneapolis. And Thomas really did tell me he couldn't come because of a project deadline. Everything up to Tuesday night was true. And then I got the call from my niece about Linda being in ICU, about me needing to postpone my visit. And that's when I had my idea. The idea that would change everything. On Wednesday morning, March 11th, 2020, I left the house at 7 a.m. with my packed suitcase, just as planned. I kissed Thomas goodbye, a brief, distant kiss that had become our norm. "Call me when you get there safely," he said, barely looking up from his coffee and newspaper. "I will," I promised, and I walked out the door. But instead of driving to Minneapolis, I drove to our daughter Rachel's house on the other side of Cedar Falls. She was at work, but I had a key. I let myself in, texted Thomas that I'd arrived safely in Minneapolis, and then I waited. I waited all day, my stomach in knots, wondering what I'd find when I went back home. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was a paranoid old woman creating drama where none existed. Part of me knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to discover something terrible. At 5 p.m., I drove back toward our house, parking 2 streets away where my car wouldn't be visible. I walked through the small patch of woods behind our property, approaching from the back. The March air was cold, and I was grateful I'd dressed warmly. When our house came into view through the trees, my heart stopped. There was a car in our driveway that wasn't Thomas's. A silver Mercedes sedan, expensive and unfamiliar. The lights were on in our living room, and through the large windows Thomas had designed to bring the outside in, I could see movement. I crept closer, staying in the shadow of the trees. And then I saw them. Thomas was in our living room, our home, with a woman. She was younger, maybe in her early 50s, blonde, beautiful, dressed in an elegant black dress. She was laughing at something Thomas had said, her hand on his arm with a familiarity that spoke of intimacy, of time spent together. As I watched, Thomas pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a deep, passionate kiss. The kind of kiss he hadn't given me in years. When they broke apart, he said something that made her laugh again, and she playfully swatted his chest. They moved toward the dining room, and I realized with growing horror that the table was set for dinner. Our good china. The candlesticks my mother had given us as a wedding present. The crystal wine glasses we'd received as an anniversary gift. He was entertaining this woman in our home, using our things, in the space we'd built together over 4 decades. I stood there in the cold, hidden in the trees, watching my husband of 43 years play house with another woman, watching him be affectionate and attentive in a way he hadn't been with me in years, watching him smile and laugh with an ease I barely recognized. I must have stood there for an hour, maybe more. I watched them eat dinner. I watched them clear the plates together, working in tandem like a couple who'd done this many times before. I watched them move to the living room, where they sat on our couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, watching something on TV. It was so domestic, so comfortable. This wasn't an affair in its early, passionate stages. This was a relationship, established and ongoing. Finally, as it grew dark and cold, I made my way back through the woods to my car. I sat there shaking, from cold, from shock, from a rage so profound I thought it might consume me. I didn't go back to Rachel's house. I drove to a hotel on the interstate, checked in under my maiden name, and lay awake all night staring at the ceiling. The next morning, Thursday, I called Sophie in Providence. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to help me with something. Can you look up property records for an address in Cedar Falls?" I gave her the address from the silver Mercedes' registration, which I'd managed to photograph through my tears. She called me back an hour later. "Mom, that address belongs to a Victoria Spencer. She bought the property 3 years ago." "Why?" "Victoria Spencer. Not Victoria Harrison, as Thomas had claimed. And she'd been in Cedar Falls for 3 years. How long had this been going on?" I spent that Thursday doing research. I created a fake social media profile and found Victoria Spencer online. Her profile was private, but her profile picture showed her at a charity gala, beautiful and confident. Her profession was listed as interior designer. I dug deeper. I found a website for her design firm, and there, in the About section, I found it. Spencer Designs has been proud to collaborate with local architects and contractors to bring beautiful spaces to life. We are especially grateful for our partnership with Thomas Reed of Reed and Associates Architecture. Partnership. They worked together. That's how they'd met. I kept digging and found photos from various Cedar Falls Society events over the past 2 years. There was Thomas at a hospital fundraiser, Victoria by his side. Thomas at a gallery opening, Victoria next to him. They weren't hiding, at least not in Des Moines, or at events I apparently wasn't expected to attend. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A society page announcement from 6 months ago. Congratulations to Victoria Spencer on her engagement. The celebrated interior designer is planning a spring wedding to her longtime partner, a local architect who prefers to remain out of the spotlight. Engagement, spring wedding, longtime partner. I called Sophie back. "I need you to come home," I told her, "and call your sister. Tell her to come too. I need you both here." "Mom, what's happening? You're scaring me. Your father..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Just come home, please." Both girls arrived Friday evening, terrified by the urgency in my voice. I met them at Rachel's house and told them everything. I showed them the photos I'd taken, the websites I'd found, the evidence I'd compiled. Rachel, always the analytical one, wanted to confront him immediately. Sophie just cried. They were both shocked, devastated, and furious on my behalf. "We need more information. Rachel said finally. Before we confront him, we need to know exactly how deep this goes. So on Saturday, the three of us drove to Victoria Spencer's address, a beautiful townhouse in the newer development on the east side of town. We parked across the street and waited. Within an hour, Thomas's car pulled into her driveway. He got out, walked to her door like he'd done it 1,000 times, and let himself in with his own key. He stayed for 5 hours. When he finally left, I followed him. Not back to our house, but to a storage unit facility on the edge of town. I watched him unlock Unit 247, disappear inside for a few minutes, then leave carrying a garment bag. After he drove away, I walked up to Unit 247. There was a combination lock on it, 5573, our old home address. Of course, Thomas was nothing if not consistent in his patterns. Inside that storage unit, I found another life. Clothes that weren't his usual style, expensive designer labels, toiletries, framed photographs of Thomas and Victoria together, smiling, in love, travel brochures for a honeymoon in Tuscany, and a box of documents that would reveal the full scope of his betrayal. There were bank statements for an account I didn't know existed, opened 5 years ago. Regular deposits from our joint account, amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice them missing, but totaling tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Receipts for jewelry, including the bracelet I'd found in his drawer. Hotel receipts from all his supposed business trips. And most damning of all, an apartment lease in Victoria's name, but with Thomas listed as a co-tenant, dated back 3 years. He'd been living a double life for at least 3 years, possibly 5. He'd been siphoning money from our savings to fund his relationship with Victoria. He'd been planning to marry her, and he'd been planning to leave me. I just hadn't been informed yet. But the most devastating document in that storage unit was a handwritten letter dated just 2 weeks earlier in Thomas's distinctive architectural drafting script. My dearest Victoria, only a few more months now and we can finally be together openly. I've spoken with my attorney, and he assures me that with Margaret's health issues, we can file for divorce on compassionate grounds, which will expedite the process and limit my financial exposure. She'll be well taken care of. The house, half the pension, insurance. I'm not a monster, but I need you to be patient just a little longer. By summer, I'll be free, and we can finally start our real life together. All my love, always, Tom. My health issues. I didn't have health issues. He was planning to claim I did to make the divorce process easier. To make himself look like the devoted husband dealing with a sick wife, garnering sympathy from our friends and community. I photographed everything in that storage unit. Every document, every receipt, every photograph. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it and left. On Sunday, I finally went home. I pulled into the driveway at 3 p.m. as scheduled. Thomas came out to greet me, all smiles and concern. "Maggie, how's Linda? How was the drive? You must be exhausted." I looked at this man I'd been married to for 43 years, the father of my children, my partner through every major moment of my adult life. He was hugging me, asking about my trip with what seemed like genuine interest. And every word out of his mouth was part of the lie. "Linda's doing better," I said, pulling away from his embrace. "The drive was long. I'm going to go lie down." Of course. I'll make you some tea." That evening at dinner, he told me about his quiet week. Just worked on some designs, organized my office like I said I would. Pretty uneventful. Missed you, though. Lies. All lies. Every word. I excused myself early, saying I was still tired from traveling. In our bedroom, the room where we'd slept together for decades, where we'd conceived our children, where we'd shared our lives. I finally broke down. I cried silently into my pillow, mourning not just the marriage I'd lost, but the years of my life I'd given to a man who'd been lying to me. On Monday morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called Patricia Winters, the best divorce attorney in the state, known for her fierce representation of wronged spouses. "Mrs. Reed," she said after I'd laid out everything I'd discovered, "this is one of the most well-documented cases I've ever seen. With what you have, we can ensure you get everything you're entitled to, and then some." Over the next 2 weeks, while Thomas continued his charade of normal married life, Patricia and I built an airtight case. We subpoenaed bank records, phone records, credit card statements. We documented every dollar he'd diverted, every lie he'd told. We found proof of at least 40 separate instances of him spending marital assets on Victoria Spencer. Patricia also did some digging into Victoria herself. Turns out she wasn't quite the successful independent designer she appeared to be. She'd had 2 previous relationships with married men, both of which had ended when the men chose to stay with their wives. Thomas was, apparently, a pattern for her. On March 30th, 2020, exactly 3 weeks after I'd canceled my trip and discovered Thomas's secret life, I finally confronted him. I chose a Tuesday evening. Rachel and Sophie were both there, at my request, sitting in the living room when Thomas came home from what he'd said was a meeting with a potential client. "Girls," he said, surprised but pleased to see them. "What a nice surprise. What brings you both?" "Sit down, Thomas," I said quietly. Something in my tone made him stop. He looked around the room, at me, at our daughters' stone-cold faces, and I saw a flicker of fear cross his features. "What's going on?" I pulled out the folder Patricia had prepared, a full documentation of his affair, his financial betrayal, his lies. I placed it on the coffee table in front of him. "This is what's going on," I said. "This is your life with Victoria Spencer, the life you've been building with our money, during our marriage, for the past 5 years." He opened the folder. I watched the color drain from his face as he flipped through page after page of evidence, bank statements, photographs, receipts, the apartment lease, the letter. "Maggie, I can explain." "Don't." My voice was sharp. "Don't you dare insult me with more lies." Rachel stood up. "How could you, Dad? How could you do this to Mom? To us?" Thomas looked at his daughters, then back at me. And instead of remorse, I saw anger flash across his face. "You were spying on me? You went through my things?" The audacity of it was breathtaking. "You stole from our marriage," I said. "You lied to me for years. You were planning to marry another woman. And you're angry that I found out? It's not... You don't understand. Maggie, our marriage has been dead for years. We both know it. Our marriage was dying because you were killing it," I shot back. "Every hour you spent with her was an hour you weren't spending with me. Every dollar you gave her was a dollar stolen from our future. Every lie you told pushed us further apart. And now you want to blame me for the distance you created?" Sophie was crying. Rachel looked like she wanted to physically throw her father out of the house. "I need you to leave," I said. "Now, tonight, and don't come back. This is my house too." "Actually," I said, pulling out another document Patricia had prepared, "as of this morning, there's a restraining order in place. You have 30 minutes to pack essential items. Everything else can be arranged through our attorneys." "Our attorneys? Maggie, we can work this out." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. You destroyed our marriage. You destroyed our trust. You destroyed 43 years of my life. The only thing left to work out is how we divide our assets, and my attorney is very good at her job." Thomas looked at the restraining order, looked at me, and finally seemed to understand that this was real. His comfortable double life was over. "Victoria loves me," he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. "She understands me in a way you never did. She appreciates my work, my creativity, Then go be with Victoria, I interrupted. But you don't get to have us both. You don't get to keep me as your safety net while you explore your creative relationship with her. You made your choice. Now live with it. He packed a suitcase in silence. Our daughters watched him with expressions of disgust and disappointment. As he headed for the door, he turned back one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, he actually sounded sincere. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I replied, "intentionally and repeatedly, for years. Now please leave." He left, and with him went 43 years of my life. The divorce took 8 months. Patricia was as good as her reputation promised. We discovered that Thomas had diverted over $200,000 from our joint accounts over 5 years. We proved that the storage unit, the apartment, the expensive gifts, all of it had been funded with marital assets. In the final settlement, I got the house, 2/3 of Thomas's pension, and a substantial portion of his retirement accounts. He had to pay back the diverted funds with interest. I got the car, most of the furniture, and primary access to all the family photographs and mementos. He got a tiny apartment, financial stress, and Victoria Spencer, who, according to my daughters, wasn't nearly as understanding about his reduced circumstances as she'd been when he was funding her lifestyle with my money. The real cost, though, wasn't financial. It was the loss of what I thought we'd been. Every memory was now tainted. Had he been thinking of Victoria when we celebrated our 40th anniversary? When he held our grandchildren? When he said he loved me? I also learned things about Thomas that I'd never known, from mutual friends who felt comfortable speaking up after the divorce. I heard that he'd apparently been known as a flirt at his architecture firm, that there had been whispers about inappropriate relationships with clients over the years. Victoria wasn't the first. She was just the one he'd gotten serious about. How had I been so blind? The truth is, I saw what I wanted to see. I believed the best in him because that's what you do when you love someone. And he took advantage of that trust for years. Our daughters struggled too. Rachel, pragmatic and logical, shifted to anger and then to a cold distance from her father. She limited his contact with Emma to supervised visits, not trusting him anymore. Sophie, more emotional, went through periods of grief, rage, and eventually a kind of sad acceptance. Both of them needed therapy to process their father's betrayal. The grandchildren were confused. Why weren't Grandma and Grandpa together anymore? Why did we have to split holidays? Why did Grandpa have a new friend named Victoria who wanted them to call her Vicky? Our community in Cedar Falls was divided. Some people quietly supported me, bringing casseroles and offering companionship. Others seemed to blame me for not keeping my husband satisfied, as if his betrayal was somehow my fault. A few mutual friends chose to maintain relationships with both of us, which I found deeply painful. The most shocking revelation came about a year after our separation. I was having coffee with Janet Morrison, Bill Morrison's wife, when she let something slip. "You know, Margaret, I'm actually glad the truth finally came out. It was so hard watching Tom lie to you for all those years. But Bill said it wasn't our place to say anything." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "You knew?" She looked stricken. Yes, Bill knew. Tom had mentioned Victoria to him, said you two had an understanding, that you were staying together for appearances but lived separate lives. We thought you knew. An understanding. Separate lives. He'd even lied to our friends about me, painting me as complicit in his affair to avoid their judgment. How many other people had known? How many pitying glances had I missed? How many whispered conversations had stopped when I entered a room? The humiliation was, in some ways, worse than the betrayal itself. It's been 5 years now since that March day when I discovered the truth. 5 years of rebuilding, of learning to be Margaret Chen instead of Margaret Reed, of rediscovering who I am outside of a marriage that defined me for so long. I'm 74 now, the same age I was in the beginning of this story. I live alone in the house Thomas designed, though I've redecorated extensively to erase his presence. I've reclaimed these spaces as my own. I still teach. Actually, just volunteer work now, tutoring students at the community center who need help with English and literature. It keeps my mind sharp and gives me purpose. My relationship with my daughters has grown stronger through this ordeal. We talk more openly now. We don't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. They check on me regularly, and I've become more involved in my grandchildren's lives than I was when Thomas was around. Emma is 16 now, preparing for college. Oliver is 14, passionate about music. I get to be a real presence in their lives, not just the grandmother who shows up for birthdays. As for Thomas and Victoria, they did eventually marry, about a year after our divorce was finalized. From what I hear through the inevitable small-town gossip, things aren't quite the fairy tale they expected. Turns out that building a relationship on betrayal and lies doesn't create a strong foundation. Who knew? Thomas has tried to reach out a few times over the years, usually around holidays or my birthday. Brief emails saying he hopes I'm well, that he thinks of me, that he's sorry for how things ended. I don't respond. There's nothing left to say. I've thought a lot about forgiveness over these 5 years. People tell me I should forgive him, that holding on to anger will only hurt me. And maybe they're right. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It doesn't mean welcoming him back into my life. I've forgiven myself, though. That was the harder work. For a long time, I blamed myself. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? At what point did I fail as a wife? It took therapy and time to understand that I wasn't responsible for Thomas's choices. He chose to lie. He chose to betray me. He chose to build a secret life instead of being honest about his unhappiness. Those were his decisions, not failures on my part. I've also learned that sometimes people change, or maybe they just reveal who they really were all along. The man I married in 1977 might have been genuine in his love for me, but somewhere along the way, that man disappeared, replaced by someone capable of sustained, calculated deception. Or perhaps he was always capable of it, and I just never saw it. One of the strangest parts of this experience has been rediscovering myself. I'd been Thomas's wife for so long that I'd forgotten how to be just Margaret. I'd made decisions based on what he wanted, what he needed, what worked for his career and his comfort. Now, at 74, I'm learning what I actually like. I've discovered I love modern art, which Thomas always dismissed as pretentious. I've joined a book club that reads experimental fiction, not just the classics. I've started traveling, small trips, but entirely on my own terms. Last year, I went to Boston for a week, just walking around, visiting museums, eating in restaurants I chose. It's terrifying and exhilarating and lonely and freeing all at once. I've also learned to sit with uncertainty. For 43 years, I thought I knew exactly what my life was and what it would be. Thomas and I would grow old together. We'd watch our grandchildren grow up. We'd celebrate 50 years, 60 years of marriage. Now I don't know what comes next, and I've had to make peace with that. Maybe I'll meet someone new, though I'm not looking. Maybe I'll stay alone. Maybe I'll do something completely unexpected. The point is, my life is mine now to shape. The hardest moments are the unexpected ones. When Emma graduates high school next year, Thomas will be there, probably with Victoria. I'll have to watch him play the proud grandfather, pretending he didn't shatter our family. When Oliver gets married someday, we'll have to negotiate seating arrangements and photographs, all of us pretending civility for the children's sake. Those moments will hurt, They already do when I think about them. But I've also had unexpected moments of joy. Last month, Sophie called to tell me she's expecting her second child. "I wanted you to be the first to know, Mom," she said. "You're going to be a grandmother again." The fact that she called me first, before her father, before anyone else, that meant something. It meant that despite everything Thomas destroyed, he didn't destroy my relationship with my children. I've also reconnected with old friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. Women I taught with who Thomas found boring. College friends who lived too far away to visit regularly. My sister Linda, who recovered from her pneumonia and has been my rock through all of this. These relationships have reminded me that I existed before Thomas and I exist after him. My value, my worth, my identity. None of it was dependent on being married to him. Sometimes people ask if I ever suspected, if there were signs I ignored. The answer is complicated. Yes, there were signs in the final years. The distance, the phone calls, the unexplained absences. But before that, I don't think so. Or maybe the signs were there and I didn't see them because I trusted him completely. That trust wasn't foolish. It was what marriage is supposed to be. Two people believing in each other, supporting each other, being honest with each other. Thomas violated that trust. That's on him, not on me for having trusted. If I could go back to that morning in March 2020 when I decided to fake my trip and discover the truth, would I do it differently? Would I rather have stayed ignorant? No. As painful as the truth was, living in ignorance would have been worse. At least now I know. I'm not wondering why my husband is distant or where he goes or who he's thinking about. I'm not making excuses for his behavior or blaming myself for problems he created. The truth set me free, even though freedom at 69 was terrifying. I've also become an accidental advocate in a way. Other women in Cedar Falls, women whose own marriages have fallen apart, have reached out to me. We meet sometimes for coffee, and I listen to their stories, offer support, remind them that they will survive this. One woman, about my age, told me recently, "You give me hope. If you can rebuild your life at 69, maybe I can too at 65. That meant more to me than she probably realized. My advice to anyone listening to this, anyone who might be facing something similar, is this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting your own perceptions. Don't make excuses for behavior that doesn't make sense. And if you discover betrayal, know that it's not your fault. You didn't cause it by being too much of something or not enough of something else. People who betray do so because of their own character flaws, their own choices, their own weaknesses. Also know that you can survive it. The pain feels unsurvivable at first. I promise you. I know. There were nights I wasn't sure I'd make it to morning, but you will. Humans are incredibly resilient. You'll discover strength you didn't know you had. And finally, don't let the betrayal make you bitter. Don't let it close your heart to life, to possibility, to joy. Thomas took enough from me. I refuse to let him take my capacity for happiness too. I still believe in love, even after everything. I still believe that people can be honest and faithful and kind. I still believe that commitment means something. Thomas broke his commitment, but that doesn't mean commitment itself is meaningless. I just choose to be more careful now about who I give my trust to. And I choose to never again make someone else the center of my entire world. I learned that lesson painfully but well. Looking back on 74 years of life, 43 of them married to Thomas, I can see the shape of it now. The early joy, the building of a life and family, the slow decay I didn't notice, and finally the destruction and rebirth. I'm in the rebirth phase now. It's slower and more uncertain than I'd like, but it's mine. Every decision I make is mine, Every morning I wake up is mine. Every book I read, every place I visit, every conversation I have. All of it is authentically mine, not performed for someone else or shaped by someone else's expectations. And that, surprisingly, is enough. I miss the marriage I thought I had. I miss the man I thought Thomas was. I miss the future I thought we'd share. But I don't miss the reality of what my marriage actually was in those final years. A lie I was living without knowing it. So here I am at 74, alone but not lonely, scared but not paralyzed, grieving but not destroyed. I water my plants, I read my books, I call my daughters, I play with my grandchildren. I make myself breakfast exactly the way I like it without worrying if someone else will approve. I watch the shows I want to watch. I go to bed when I'm tired and wake up when I'm ready. It's a small life, maybe, compared to the grand narrative I thought I was living. But it's honest. It's real. And after 43 years of living in a beautiful lie, reality is surprisingly sweet. The house is quiet now. No one to answer to. No one to cook for unless I choose to. No one's schedule to accommodate but my own. Sometimes the quiet feels too heavy, pressing down on me with the weight of everything I've lost. But other times, the quiet feels like peace, and after everything, peace is enough. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let me know in the comments section. If you like the story, you can support me by liking this video and subscribing to my channel so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments and thoughts about this story. On the screen, you can see 2 new interesting stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel too. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story.